Hi, and welcome to the Psych, Health and Safety podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we'll have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. Before I introduce our guest and topic for the day, though, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. Hey, how are you today, Joelle?
Feeling good, Jason. It's Friday, heading into the weekend.
Yes, it is, and I can assure the listeners that the big mug in front of Joelle is not full of coffee.
It's tea.
It's tea. So, we've actually got a very special episode today. It's our first time that we've had a guest in our studio. I'd like to introduce her. She is an organisational psychologist. She is the founder of FIFO Focus. She is my original favourite woman of organisational psychology. Sorry, Joelle. It is Sandra Lam. Welcome to the show.
I don't know what to say to that. It's all warm and fuzzies today.
You're still my favourite, Sandra, but don't tell Joelle. Yeah.
That's all right. I'll remember.
It's lovely to be here.
Yeah. Now, for those of you who are watching the YouTube video, you'll notice it's Chinese New Year, the day that we're actually recording this. Sandra's dressed for the occasion.
I am. Red everywhere.
Yeah, even a red seat.
I know. And it's a velvet seat too, so I love this textural feel.
Yeah, we like to look after our guests. So if any other psych, health and safety experts are in the Perth metro area and want to come into the studio and record with us, then do reach out. But awesome to have you on the show today, Sandra.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
All right, Sandra, one of the questions that we like to ask everybody is what your favourite podcasts are, aside from ours, obviously, which would be top of the list.
I totally agree. It was. I was going to actually totally say that.
Fantastic.
Yes.
What else do you like to listen to?
So I'm actually a TED Talk sort of girl. So I love listening to anything TED Talk. There's NPR that I also really enjoy listening to. I like everything to do with the brain, funnily enough. So there's All in the Mind and the Human Brain. I really enjoy listening to those. But I've actually been off podcasts lately. Don't know why. I just thought I'd just give myself a bit of a break from listening to just more information because we get overly stimulated. And I'm trying to do more fiction. So not necessarily listening to fiction, actually a bit of Audible as well, listening to fiction, but also just reading more fiction. I'm just finding these days that I'm just doing too much of just anything non-fiction, learning more information, trying to, integrate the knowledge I have, and I'm not doing anything that's related to sort of switching off.
Yeah, I've found similar, viewing, like TV programs and that sort of thing. I think just with the sheer volume of stuff going on in the world, I've been drawn more to, escapism and trash, really. Rather than that sort of, gritty, show it as it is kind of stuff. I just, life's real enough right now without having to watch it on TV. So just show me something dumb and funny is kind of where I'm at the moment.
I totally hear you. I think it's just being able to switch off and not have to think is exactly what I want. Is that? Can you call that mindfulness?
To some degree.
Mindlessness.
Yeah.
Mindlessness.
Hamish and Andy is a good podcast for that, I find. So
that is true. Yeah. Yes, and they're great. So I enjoy them too.
All right. Well, that's a little bit about you personally. Tell us about your professional career.
So, Psych. So Psych trained in. I did a few different universities. I did my undergrad at UWA. Did the psychology degree in UWA, and then I went to Curtin to do my Masters of Psych. I know you're Murdoch.
Mm-hmm. Murdoch Masters, Curtin undergrad.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Bit of a flip, yeah. And then I decided, because it's Psych that I chose, when I was going through the studies, I don't think many people understood what Psych did. I've actually had people say, oh, so you teach people how to organise. No, it's so I decided to actually just sort of strengthen my degree by doing an MBA. So I did an MBA at ECU. So I'm really just missing the Murdoch University piece now, and then I would just feel complete.
Do a grad dip or something.
Something along those lines. Yeah, so that's basically, I did the Psych degrees, and then I went into small jobs in training industry councils. So I did work for the Printing Utilities, Electrotechnology and Printing Industry Training Council. That is such a mouthful.
It's worse than Opsema.
It is, yeah.
But what's really good about that is a lot of project work. So I think it gives you a really good foundation to really delve into research and then produce something that is evidence-based. So I think that's the beginning of me being really interested in doing something practical, but it's also very evidence-based as well. And then I moved into police. So I worked with the police for about 9 years. I loved working with the police because I think deep down inside I like working for organisations that really make a difference. So I know a lot of people think about the police as, you know, they just they can be bad, but I think they do such a great job, really hard jobs, and I just loved everyone that I worked with there, which is probably why I stayed there for 9 years, which is a really long time.
It is.
It is, isn't it? And then from there I basically worked in mining. So I worked in an alumina firm, you know where that is. And then during that time I got called up to see if I wanted to work overseas in aid work, and that really resonated with me. I'm just a bit of this altruistic person. So that's when I just got this great opportunity to work overseas in Fiji. Yes.
Wow.
In Fiji with cocktails.
Would you like to work on a tropical island?
I know. I was like, I don't know. It's a bit hard to decide. So I did that. And what I really loved about that is that also honed my skills in building capacity. So I'm really into being able to teach others so that, you know, what's that phrase? You know, teach man to fish. Yeah, I'm really into that. So it's not just being people relying on me, but being able to just share my skills so other people can actually develop and just go forth and multiply, that sort of thing. So that's where I really did that work.
Yep. And what came next? You're not still in Fiji?
No, I'm not still in The coup actually got me out of Fiji, the Fiji coup.
Good time to leave, yeah.
I know, I thought it was a really great time. Actually, we were on the golf course at the time, so it wasn't as scary as what it was made out to be. But then that's when we moved to Brisbane, and then I still did a lot of it was actually like FIFO, because my stint was 6 months on, 3 weeks off.
Oof.
So that's when I really realised that there is something into this whole being separated by work piece. And at that time, I was losing friendships because no one invites you to anything because you can never turn up. And then suddenly you just don't get invited anymore. You just don't exist. So that's when I thought, this has got to impact on people's mental health. You know, the whole lack of connectedness. What kept me going was purpose. So this is when you start to think about, well, what's really important to keep a person thriving. It's having purpose, but also the connection needs to be really important as well. So I gave up aid work and luckily got a job in mining again. And that's the reason I did that was I felt like I learnt a lot in the whole aid capacity building piece. Really wanted to make difference to communities, and mining gives a lot of money to the communities, but I wondered whether they were doing it in a way that was beneficial for both parties. So I wanted to bring that skill from aid work into the mining field. And that's basically where I've sort of stayed for the last however many years.
Okay. And what are you doing now?
So now FIFO Focus, we've been operating for the last 6 years. And I mean, what we're focusing really on is mental health, but creating psychologically healthy workplaces. I think as org psychs, we don't just do the reactive work, we look at the preventative work. And even 6 years ago, we were looking at, it's not just about training people to be healthy because you're just focusing on the individual, but how do we stop people from getting harmed in the first place by the nature of the job, the way the organisations are treating their people, the leaders are treating their people. So there was a bigger piece to it, and I was really keen on putting that on the agenda as much as I could. And that's when the Parliamentary Inquiry came out as well. So the timing was bang on. So that's when I felt this is it. This is the journey that I want to participate in. I really make a difference in a big way. It's preventative, which is what I really enjoy, but you still get to tap into the individual piece as well. So that's where we've been for the last 6 years.
Just on the Parliamentary Inquiry, we have a global audience, right? So many of them would not be familiar with what's happening at a state level in WA. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was a bunch of, I can't say bunch, there were a lot of suicides happening in the FIFO industry in a short period of time, and there's about 12 months. I think it was like 9 in 12 months. So the government decided to launch an inquiry to find out why. So this was in 2015. So fair few industry members were interviewed, and people could put their submissions in, and union reps and everything like that. Just the whole purpose of it is to find out whether there was damage being caused by the whole FIFO arrangement, and then what recommendations can be put in place to minimise that impact in future, in a nutshell.
Yeah, yeah. And that's obviously spurred other things that we'll talk about later in the podcast today, yeah.
So was that sort of one of your motivations to found FIFO Focus then, the Parliamentary Inquiry and what it was finding?
Yeah, because I just think people should stop dying. It's as simple as that. And when we're talking about suicide, that's like the worst thing. And a lot of people say it's a suicide seeking attention, but really it's a huge cry for help. And I don't think any job should require people to get to that point where they feel as though they've got no hope. So, yes. Most definitely.
Yeah, I've made that point before as well, that, you know, if somebody's attempting suicide as a attention seeking and cry for help, there's something wrong there.
Definitely. And I think it's hard. That FIFO gig is hard. It's not a lot of people who think that it's FIFO unit is all about the money, but you actually sacrificing so much freedom for that money. So it's being understood that there's actually a lot of complexity with FIFO. It's not just what people see when they're sitting in Perth. The options are not available to you up there. If you say, I don't feel great, I'm just going to grab a massage, you can't do that. I liken it to like an ant colony. You get told what to do at what point in time. You know, crib times are certain hours of the day. You can't just step outside and go, I'll just do a bit of this and do that. You just don't have that option. So you lose a lot of your freedom. You lose a lot of your control, which are really fundamental parts of being human.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you obviously have a very good understanding of what's happening in FIFO, particularly from a mental health perspective. I mean, you founded a company based on this, right? So tell us about the current state of psychological health and safety in FIFO.
Yeah, look, it's progressed a fair bit, I think, but I think we still have a long, long way to go. And what's been really great is there's a lot more awareness raising, there's lots more stigma reduction, so we're getting a lot of people, lived experiences coming onto site and sharing their experiences, which is really, really great for stigma reduction, without a doubt. We're getting a lot of training as well, so a lot of organisations are training their people up on mental health first aid. The only issue that I have is that's still very pointy end stuff. You know, if you think about the statistics of 1 in 5 Australians will experience a mental health concern every year, and it's 1 in 3 for FIFO population, that's really getting us to focus on the one. But what about the others? And also, how do you prevent the harm from happening in the first place? Teaching people to be resilient or, you know, bear the brunt of all the bad stuff is only one side of it, but what about preventing the harm from happening in the first place? Which is what I really enjoy about the work that we do. It's not just the training. Of course, we do the training piece, which is the mitigating illness piece, but the preventative piece. And as org psychs, we look at things from a systems perspective. You know, we look at the culture, we look at engagement, we look at how jobs are designed, we look at the training, we look at the leaders, we look at all of those pieces and how do they all fit together in this big puzzle to minimise the harm to our people that are going to be resilient from the training they receive as well. So it's just the whole piece, which is what I really enjoy.
Yeah, no, we really buy into that shared responsibility for mental health at work. Obviously, the predominant view at the moment is really focused on the individual. How do we make them more resilient? How do we make them handle stress better, make them more mindful? But the other part of it, as you say, is that the employer needs to understand that the conditions that they're putting employees under also contribute to mental health outcomes.
Yep, absolutely. And I think this is where the education piece really needs to be ramped up. There's more organisations now getting their leaders trained up in psychosocial hazards, which is really, really important. So it's not just about mental health and anxiety and depression, which is it's nice to know about, of course, but that's already too late down the line. Yeah. So minimise the harm. Look at the level of control and autonomy, whether there's reward and recognition, is the change management done well? You know, all of those things that you don't think is actually psychology or even mental health, but it absolutely is, because anything that's within the organisation that stresses people out over time is a hazard. Mm-hmm. And it's most definitely something that we should be considering as leaders to minimise as much as possible.
Yeah, Dia Day, who was on Wednesday's episode, talked to this water dripping on a rock kind of analogy, right? Yeah. You don't see the damage that's being done until the rock cracks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you look at stats and burnout, you know, that's another piece that's really skyrocketing as well. So how do we minimise all of these, like job demands and lack of clarity, all of those things as well?
Yeah, so you talked a bit about, you know, the current popular approaches, which is more down the pointy end, mitigate illness. You talked how some companies are starting to look more at psychosocial hazards and training management, line managers up. Where else do you think that employers and FIFO need to go in order to improve in psych health and safety space?
Yeah, I think we need to be looking at a whole total mental health strategy. And wherever possible, I encourage the mental health strategy to be integrated with the whole culture and organisational strategy piece. Because the last thing we want is to have mental health as a tick and flick. It's another thing that's separate to, it's another burden on leaders. We need to be integrating this into the culture so that psychologically healthy workplaces isn't just a tick and flick, but it's part of doing business as usual. So if, as much as we can, if we can develop a mental health strategy that integrates with everything else, particularly with the safety systems, I think we're going to create something that's way more sustainable. And also looking at, as I was saying before, some of that thriving piece, you know, so rather than just looking at when people are ill or not doing really well or struggling, which is, I think, the coping side of if you're looking at a resilience scale, what about the thriving bit, getting people to be healthy, looking at sort of the positive psychology work? How do we get people resilient in that way so that they're less likely to fall into the needing to seek help piece?
Yeah, great.
Yeah. And that kind of creates that buffer as well, doesn't it? That mental health buffer that when those pressures do start to mount up again, you've got some space for that to happen, I guess, when you're doing the flourishing piece as well.
Yep,
yeah,
definitely.
Absolutely. It creates some more space. All right, so let's talk a bit more about the WA Parliamentary Inquiry into FIFO mental health. What are the outcomes that you've observed from that as far as how employers approach psychological health and safety?
Yeah, I think the major one is the Code of Practice that's come out, and DMIRS has written this Code of Practice, which really basically takes a risk management approach to psychological health in the workplace, which I think is critical. Risk management has been around for a long time. We need to be doing it in all industry, not just the mining and resources industry. So that's something that's really not new to the organisations, but what is new is what the content is, which is psychological health. It's a big one to move people from, because mental health and psychological health is not something you can see, so it's much harder to pinpoint what to do. So this is the education piece. So yes, I'd say the Code of Practice being developed is really great. Using the risk management approach is the way to go. So controlling the risk wherever possible, identifying and controlling them.
Okay. And how do you see that Code of Practice being implemented at the moment?
I think we're getting there. What I'm seeing a lot of is a lot of internal auditing occurring. So using the audit tool and walking around and going to your sites and going, I think we've got this, I think we've got that. But I think the main thing that we need to be doing is actually asking our people. You know, there's no point just sort of desktop studying it or just through observations. We've got to ask the people, because a lot of this stuff, as I was saying before, it's internal. So we need to be asking people what's going on in relation to all the different psychosocial hazards. And if we're not assessing our people, we're not consulting our people, so therefore we're not developing something that's going to be accurate and fix the problem that's actually at hand.
So you think it's a bit more of a, let's go through and make sure that within our system we've got all of these elements, but that critical consultation piece just is missing from that process.
100%. I think when you're just doing observations, really you're just, it's kind of like sticking finger in the air sort of stuff. You really need to be getting data. I think data is king. So the more data we can actually access, which is real, the more we can track it. And we're really great on having KPIs with lots of industries. So why do we actually do this with psychological health? And making sure that the survey that you do use, or the focus groups or workshops, whatever you run, are evidence-based. So the questions you ask will produce right or the wrong answers. So I think it's really important that whatever tool you use are good, valid tools.
Yep, really important points there. And we've been talking a lot about the upcoming ISO 45003 on the podcast. Do you think that once that is actually published, or what effect do you think that will have in the FIFO world?
I think, When we talk ISO, I think it's going to be huge. But what's probably even bigger now is the Work Health and Safety 2020 Act. That actually, for us in WA, it's new-ish, but part of the rest of the world, except for Victoria, is not new. And that's basically putting psychological health right front and centre as well, and looking at it from a preventative piece. So I think that's goes hand in glove with the ISO work. So I think it's great because we're talking about preventative now, not what we're used to, which is just really reactive in terms of addressing mental health in the workplace.
Okay.
Yeah, so I see with some of these things that are happening, like like you say, changes to the WHS Act, hopefully, can maybe bring us to the same level as Canada, where I see they're kind of leading the pack, or maybe even go past it if we're actually incorporating it into legislation and not just having a standard.
Agree. Completely agree with that.
Yeah. And obviously, for those who aren't in Australia, we had a Productivity Commission inquiry into mental health that was released at the end of last year. And out of 5 priority reforms, one was around workplace mental health. And the number one thing that they have suggested as a priority reform in that area is to elevate psychological health and safety to the same level as physical health and safety. Yeah, and so we're seeing a lot of work. We'll have Ian Firth from SafeWork New South Wales to talk about the draft code of practice that they are getting consultation on at the moment there. But there's a lot of work in this space that is really trying to ramp up how companies adopt a psychological health and safety approach.
That's so exciting, isn't it?
Yeah. 2021 is an exciting year, Joel, and I keep saying that. So
Exciting for many reasons.
Yes, absolutely. So how do you then view the role of org psychs in FIFO, Psych Health and Safety?
Yeah, I think about this a lot, and I think we underestimate what skills we have. And the skills I think we have is a very big systems approach. Yes, you can get trainers in. Anyone can, no, I can't say that. But, you can come in and do mental health training, but anyone can be trained on how to deliver that sort of service. Yes, you need counsellors, you need psychologists to do the counselling work. But what we do is we look at the whole system. So a lot of org psychs are very well trained in your strategy. So we know that we understand the bottom line. We understand you need the survival piece. We understand productivity. So we can actually look at where you're trying to head. We're very good at the whole culture piece because the culture is what makes or breaks an organisation. So we know how to do cultural change that marries up with where you're trying to go with in relation to strategy. We can make sure that the mental health piece forms part of your culture. It's not just an add-on like an app, an add-on app thing. The whole integrated systems approach, I think, is where org psychs play a major part. We are trained in the whole org design piece. We're trained in basically how people work at work. How to get them most productive, how to get them most engaged. So, for me, in a nutshell, it's a whole systems integrated approach. So we know where you're trying to head, so we're not just trying to just make you spend money unnecessarily. And, of course, everything's evidence-based. So it's not just a guesstimate of maybe we should ask this question or do it this way. There's lots of evidence behind a lot of things that we recommend.
And funnily enough, with a podcast hosted by a couple of psychologists, there's a lot of talk about evidence-based and having to get that right. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess with some of the changes around psych health and safety and a lot of push now to put that under a OHSMS and get health and safety involved, how do you see org psychs maybe collaborating with health and safety in order to get positive employee mental health outcomes?
Yeah, it's actually really funny because I was just reflecting back on the clients we have. I've gone through the safety group for probably about 80% of the clients. I think there's this realisation that when you're doing mental health, it's actually a safety situation. It's not a HR. Although having said that, it's a bit of teamwork here. We find that the organisations that do best in this area are those where the safety team and the HR team work together as one group, trying to achieve the same outcome. Yeah. So I think safety is the place it needs to be front and centre. And of course, when we're talking about the Work Health and Safety Act, it's a safety thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there any thing that you wanted to note around where we might need to make improvements? I mean, one of the things I've noticed is when we go down the HR route and we're doing workplace mental health, it often becomes a voluntary thing, right? This is a nice to have, it's a wellbeing initiative. Put your hand up if you've got time to be involved in yoga before work or walking clubs at lunchtime, that sort of thing. So do you have any views on, whether workplace mental health should be a voluntary or a mandatory kind of initiative?
This is a really good question. And the reason I think it's a really good question is it's in the same way that you mandate physical safety training because people can get injured. You probably should be mandating mental health training for the same reason. Having said that, because there's such stigma associated with mental health, when you force things on people, I don't think the uptake is great either. So it's really being able to strike that balance or looking at the maturity of the organisation. And I talk about maturity not in the whole kid adult thing, but, their level of readiness in terms of talking about mental health in this way. So I think organisations that are really good with demonstrating that they do care can mandate these sorts of training and it wouldn't be seen as bad. But I think if you go too hard, too fast, people will just go, it's just another bloody thing I need to do on top of the other bloody things I need to do. I just swore on the podcast, sorry. But
I've heard
not
worse.
a swear word in Australia.
I've heard worse from you, Sandra. So,
yeah, so I think it's a fine line. It depends on where you're at with your organisation.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I mean, if the first thing you're going to do as an organisation to mitigate the risk of psychological harm is to train your employees, they're probably going to find it quite patronising and going, well, why am I still having to work, 14 hours a day to keep on top of my workload? And you're going to fix it by a training intervention.
And that is so true. And this is something that we try to focus on as well. So you know about the 70-20-10, which is the training model that, 10% is what you spend your training on. That's the face-to-face sort of, or not even face-to-face these days, but, that's your training bit. The 20% is the coaching and mentoring and your 70% is on the job, or I call that the cultural piece.
Yeah.
There is a lot of money being spent on the 10% only. But as we know that after about 3 days, whatever you've just learnt in the classroom has completely disappeared. So if there's not a 20% or a 70% on top of that to really reinforce the learning, it's actually not good ROI at all. So we need to be looking at a whole systematic approach. So you do the training. How do we reinforce the training through some coaching or mentoring or just peer support discussions or whatever it is, or having toolbox presentations so it's always front and centre. And then the culture needs to be enhancing and enabling all of this sort of stuff to occur as well. So I think we need to be looking at the whole spectrum of how to make this stuff really get embedded and sustainable.
Yeah, it's one of my pet peeves when we have an employer, a potential client come and contact us and say, oh, look, we really want to do your training. And, when we have a look at what else they're doing and they just want to use the training, I'm fairly reluctant to work with those employers because the training will not be received well.
No, absolutely not. This is when I think it's a tick and flick.
Yeah, absolutely. So it would be great to see, employers take more of a systematic approach and look at things like the codes and actually work through that in a systematic way to ensure they've got all the enablers. And obviously we know one of the key enablers is leadership commitment. So how do you think leaders could actually demonstrate commitment to a psychologically healthy and safe workplace?
Yeah, we know that one of the major supportive factors is the supervisory support. So I think leaders need to fully understand what these psychosocial hazards are and really be committed to changing them. I know work and performance, this is always a struggle with companies, is people over performance. But there needs to be a realisation that if you look after your people, performance will come. And again, we need to be thinking about that. Leaders really need to understand the impact of their actions on a daily basis on the people that are under them and in their command.
Yeah, so competence and understanding these psychosocial hazards is a big part of ISO 45003 as it is its parent standard. So to what degree have you observed that leadership actually understand psychosocial hazards, or that differentiator between an individual mental health issue and what the employer can actually control, which is the hazard?
I think that there's a lot of improvement in that area that's required. Yeah, definitely, because it's still a journey for a lot of people. I think a lot of people, when they think preventative, they're still thinking about individual prevention. So I talk to people about we need to be focused on prevention, and they'll say, yeah, but I'm teaching my people how to prevent themselves from getting sick. That's the individual prevention. We need to be really elevating that to make it an organisational prevention piece, which includes your leadership, includes your culture, includes your engagement, includes your work design piece. That's true prevention in my mind.
Yeah. Well, what would you say to a leader in an organisation who says, no, mental health isn't our responsibility, that's an individual thing, they bring that to work?
That's actually how I respond. Sorry. I'm really happy that I don't hear that anymore.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
great.
which is really, really great.
Yeah.
So whatever we've been doing in terms of reducing stigma and actually raising the profile of mental health is working. So I'm really happy that that doesn't happen anymore. But if that actually happened, I actually don't know what I'd say, except for probably have a bit of a chuckle and a big sigh. And then I'll probably just work through, like when you get stressed, where does that happen predominantly?
Yeah.
So thinking about the future, Sandra, blue sky thinking,
I love it.
what are your hopes for the future of workplace mental health?
I think the future is when companies, organisations realise that when you hire a person, you're hiring a whole person. They don't just bring the employee part of their brain to work, they bring the whole of them. And I think it'd be ideal if organisations will bring the best out of the whole of person. I think in terms of well-being, you're going to be looking at mental health, physical health, career health, financial health, social health. All of that is going to be integrated into one big whole person thing. And I think when organisations and individuals work with that in mind, we're going to really change the world. I'm thinking that's really big, like the sky stuff. But I think it's we're heading that way anyway. It's not just mental health now; it's this whole integrated everything. That's where I see the future.
Wonderful. We do aim to change the world here at People Diagnostics.
So do I.
That's why you go into psychology, isn't it?
I think so.
Put something better in the world than it was. All right. So thinking about professionals who might want to work in this field, do you have some words of wisdom for them?
Oh, we need lots of people in this field. I think being curious, being open-minded, seeing the links with everything is a really critical skill to have when you want to work well in this space. And think preventative, not punitive. I think is also really important as well. Really supportive. This is hard stuff. When you're talking about changing human nature and changing the way that we've been taught to think in organisations for such a long period of time, that's a hard gig, but it's well worth it because I think you really can make a difference.
Yeah, well, I think you are making a difference, Sandra. I think your work is very important. And, we hope that we can make this a regular segment with Sandra on our show. You've just got such a great depth of knowledge in the area and experience. And particularly because we're coming out of Western Australia and there's so much mining and fly out type activities, I think, definitely local people would really benefit from your understanding.
Oh, I'd be honoured. It'd be great. And you keep making me coffees like that. I mean...
I'll see what I can do. I am the office everything, including the coffee maker. So
I love it.
Yeah.
Multi-skilled.
Yeah. So, Sandra, it's been great having you on. Great discussion as always. Where can people find out more about FIFO Focus?
We're everywhere. FIFOfocus.com.au is our website, and we're on, Instagram and Facebook and not Snapchat. Is it? Snapchat's still on anymore? I'm
too old for that.
Yeah. I don't do TikTok, so I can't dance. But, aside from that, you can find us on most places in social media.
Yeah, fantastic. So, thanks again, Sandra, for having on. And that kind of brings us to the end of the show today. So thank you very much for tuning in, listeners. Don't forget, you can watch the videos on YouTube on the Flourish GX channel if you want to see Sandra's gorgeous red dress and the red velvet chair that she's sitting on. Also, we're very active on LinkedIn. So if you want to hit us up with a follow or connect, we're friendly and we love to engage with like-minded professionals. And so thank you again for listening, and we hope to come back with you next week with some more great information and evidence-based practice around psychological health and safety. Thanks again.